Uh, One of our panelists is Steve Roth. He's the general counsel at Parkland Hospital. Steve has over 20 years of legal experience that has made him a valuable corporate legal and operations strategist. We're excited to have you, Steve. Cherylyn Foster is the deputy general counsel at Parkland Health. Cherylyn has worked in Parkland since 2006. She attended Texas A&M University and South Texas College of Law in Houston. The next is Mandy Price, who's the co-founder and CEO of Canaris. Canaris is a technology platform that works to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And then finally, we have our moderator today, my friend, Amy M. Stewart, who's the founding partner for Stewart Law Group, a minority and women-owned law firm based in Dallas that handles commercial, labor, employment, and insurance defense matters for clients such as Frito-Lay, JP Morgan Chase, Liberty Mutual, and Merrill Lynch. And we're happy to support all these efforts and our friends over at Stewart Law Group. So I hope you'll keep her in mind for some of your legal needs. And I apologize for all the craziness in the background here. We've had a flood, and so we've got a bunch of contractors making a racket. So I'm going to go back on mute, and Amy, let you take it away. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Mark. And I want to reiterate what Susan has talked about. Mark has done an amazing job in Dallas to support communities during the pandemic, as well as after Snowmageddon last week. And he's also had surgery. And so he is just a beast right now. And we just really thank you for all those efforts in helping with the DEI initiative. So transitioning to our first program. So today we're going to have two programs. And the first one are these lovely people here. And I love that the initiative for this year is the year of action, because if anyone knows me, I'm a very let's get it done type person. So it really fits quite well with what we're going to talk about today. So our first presentation is really about how legal departments can create a strong foundation for their DEI efforts. And I'm going to kind of talk with my friends here about a situation that we have dealt with that I think is very enlightening on how legal departments can take issues that happen within the company and provide opportunities for minority women and other lawyers and other vendors to get involved and help resolve disputes. So I'm going to jump right in and start talking with Steve. Steve, can you just kind of identify overall what your legal department's initiatives are to hire and retain outside legal counsel and vendors who are diverse?
Absolutely. But first, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important topic, and I'm honored to be included amongst the distinguished group of panelists. Parkland, serves the engine of Dallas County, and our employees, contractors, vendors, and law firms, we believe, should reflect the diversity of the community that we serve. It's our belief that a diverse legal profession is just more just, productive, and intelligent because diversity, both cognitively and culturally, often leads to better questions, analyses, solutions, and processes. And at Parkland, diversity, equity, and inclusion starts at the top. We have diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, both for legal and non-legal matters. And I know that they're in my evaluation and Dr. Sharice's, our CEO's evaluation. And it's also reflected in the hiring in our department. Our department has 30 individuals at this juncture. We won an award a few years ago for our diversity in our department from the Magna Stella Award from the Texas General Counsel Foundation. So what we do, and we believe that diversity is reflected in our hiring decisions. What we do is we maintain a minority and woman-owned law firm database that includes attorney bios from WMBE law firms that's searchable from practice areas. And our attorneys on my staff, there are 10 of us, are directed to consult the database prior to engaging attorneys on new matters. We have frequent discussions, including even yesterday, Carolyn on my team is on, regarding where are we at with respect to retaining our new WMBE law firms. We've brought on a number of new ones very recently. so they, again, we consult each other. Every new firm that we bring on has to be approved by me as the general counsel. We work hand in hand with our supplier diversity department, to identify diverse law firms. We meet with diverse law firms. We've had let's talk business sessions. We have billing guidelines that I send to each individual and send a letter to each firm that even if the firm is a majority firm and not a minority firm, that we expect our matters to be staffed by diverse individuals. We also have law firms report on the race and gender of the attorneys and other staff that work on our matters. So I think our managing in-house attorneys, they understand the need for diversity. We measure it, we track it, we monitor it, we report on it on a regular basis, and that's all the way up to the board of managers. Other than that, I would just say that referrals from colleagues are very important, and networking is very important. But we understand the importance of diversity in our legal team.
Thank you for that. I think everyone believes if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. So I really appreciate you sharing the part about that not only are those efforts being done, but you're actually monitoring and there's data associated with that. So turning to what happened last year in May with the murder of George Floyd, and Steve, I'm going to stay with you. I think it's fair to say it's impacted all of our relationship with talking about race and dealing with racial issues. Can you, and you've kind of already talked a little bit about it, but can you specifically talk about initiatives that Parkland has in place to basically make the work environment a more inclusive environment?
Sure. And I can say that, Parkland's response, to the George Floyd matter was swift and was first addressed at the C-suite level, beginning with an all-staff communication from our CEO, who addressed his concerns, as well as a process he put in place to talk with over 200 African-American staff and leaders to hear their concerns firsthand. And there are a bunch of themes that we learned from that. Some of it were a perception of lack of opportunity for growth and development, disrespectful communication, and just that racial matters were not handled consistently or quickly enough. And so we then kind of launched into several diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, including a comprehensive program we called Journey to Allyship, and we've just completed phase 1 and phase 2. We'll begin in early spring, and that part of that was a library of resources and a 21-day challenge. We're also launching a pilot courageous conversation with cohort groups, to move from action to move from awareness of the issues to action, and that program is currently under development. Our Journey to Allyship series, which promoted inclusion and belonging at Parkland, received a really overwhelming response from our employee base, and there were over 900 participants in that 21-day program. And again, it would create a foundation of awareness about race and equity issues, power and privilege, and a strong enabler for ending systemic racism and its health impact. In addition, one of the things that we've really focused on is our hiring, and the employees that we're hiring are now we're focused on the lower socioeconomic zip codes in Dallas, and 1/3 of the hires that we made in all of last year were from those zip codes, and 40% of those individuals that we hired last year were Black, 41% Hispanic, and which is kind of in parity with our patient demographics. We are now planning on a DEI enterprise-wide plan, focusing on outcomes. It's going to be informed by a cultural 360 feedback that the plan is due later this month.
So Carolyn, tossing it over to you. So it's not your first DEI senior executive, but you guys just hired a new one. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yes. Yes, we have hired Dr. Mayfield. She has a PhD in education. And her position is Director of Cultural Competency. And then under her, we have a Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager. The idea behind hiring someone with an education background is to be able to roll out these initiatives in a way that people can learn, that our staff and our leaders can learn, and it's put out to them where it's understandable, where they can learn how to use tools to improve the work environment and be more effective. And so we're really moving from the broader, higher level goals to trying to implement on a frontline basis.
Great. Transitioning over to you, Mandy. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, there has to be an intentionality behind efforts to create diverse environments. Can you talk a little bit about that based on your work at Canaries?
Yeah, sure. So, a lot of times I think the first thing that people will think about with DEI is bringing in a speaker or someone to do an unconscious bias training. And we often advise against that. We have to be intentional and ensure that the trainings, the long-term strategy, everything that we're doing is based off that unique organization. We know that every workplace is different. And so although there's research best practices as far as how our systems need to be in place, we really have to do a diagnosis and understand what's going on exactly within that workplace and tailor all of our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives around that workplace. And so like you noted earlier, we're very much into data and measurement. What doesn't get measured and tracked won't change. And so when we're working with organizations, the first thing we do is do that assessment and be able to understand kind of what is currently going on within the organization, so the organization really knows where to focus their attention and where we're able to design those prescriptive, tailored trainings and strategy and recommendation plan based off where the organization is now and where they want to be within the next few months and their overall long-term goals over the next year and 5 years.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick with you. I mean, this is just a reality, and I'm a realist person. Talking about race is uncomfortable. It just is for anyone that's involved in it. And then you add it to the workplace. Can you talk a little bit about your experience since George Floyd? Have you had more customers, clients come to you and say, how do we deal with this at the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had many organizations come to us and want to ensure that they're doing this right. We know that there's been a heightened awareness around these issues. And as you noted, it's very difficult to talk about race in the workplace. A lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion issues are difficult to talk about. And so that's why it's so important to have an expert to come in. We know a lot of companies are really well-intentioned and they've had conversations or facilitated some of these discussions, but it's hard to do that if you don't have an expert that is trained about how to talk about race, how to talk about how race represents itself in the workplace and the challenges that employees encounter with respect to these issues. A lot of times it's difficult for employees to talk about them, right? We saw a lot of organizations right after George Floyd have town halls, right? And, just think about anything that's been traumatic, think of a death in the family or anything like that. And then you're prompting people to talk about something that's triggering and traumatic. So it has to be done with care. Otherwise, you're really traumatizing that person all over again. So I think it's key and critical that you bring in the experts that can help facilitate these conversations in a way that are useful without traumatizing those employees again.
Yeah, and then when you're at the workplace, Steve, tossing it over to you, like when an employee at Parkland has an issue related, they think they have a concern that they think they're being discriminated against or harassed. Can you walk us through the different ways that they can report those at Parkland?
Yes. So concerns involving race discrimination or hostile work environment would cross both compliance and human resource lines. And they would, represent a potential violation of Parkland's policy on collegial behavior, the code of conduct, and other elements of our compliance and ethics program. Employees and others can directly report potential concerns to any member of management, the Office of Talent Management, which is our HR department, or the compliance department. They can also report anonymously through our integrity line, which accepts confidential reports upon request, via phone or via an online portal where callers could voluntarily share their identity and contact information if they should so choose. So employees, contract workers, vendors, business partners, and other colleagues are made aware of these options through a variety of sources, including posters placed in various locations across campus, our internet, the intranet, the public internet, and it is part of required new hire and annual training and new employee and contractor orientation.
Yeah, and Cherylyn, you are all things employment law at Parkland. So someone takes advantage of these opportunities to voice their concerns. Tell us about what your role is.
I work very closely. I'm the primary employment law attorney at Parkland. And I recently got some help, which I'm really thrilled about. And thank you, Steve. So it's good to have a reliable, he's not really associate level, he's more advanced than that. But it's very good because that way we can jump on things faster. We work very closely with our Office of Talent Management, which, as Steve said, is our human resources function at Parkland, OTM. You may hear us talk about that. And compliance. We work very closely with both of those departments. And part of the reason compliance is so involved is because they are the ones that manage that integrity line that Steve was talking about. It is a third-party vendor, but the cases come in through there, and then they may keep them, they may assign them over to the Office of Talent Management if they are related to an employment issue and don't involve allegations of somebody in OTM doing something inappropriate. So we have those mechanisms. Most of those go to OTM first, maybe compliance in a few circumstances will kick off an investigation. They will look at it, and if it looks like anything that needs legal support or it looks like something that could be a difficult situation that may involve legal risk, they will call me. We are in constant contact between our three departments, and we work very closely together as a team and try to be available and a resource for both of those teams of people to help guide them as they're trying to investigate things. So I think that close working relationship among the three departments is the most important thing.
Okay, so we're going to talk specifically about a specific incident that we've all worked on in certain different parts together. In last fall, there was an incident that made it into the news where a manager had provided gifts as a part of a competition to certain employees, and some of the employees who received those gifts thought they were racially insensitive, and an investigation occurred. Steve, can you talk to us based on your position, General Counsel, head of the legal department, about what actions were you having to take generally when something like that arises?
Absolutely. The first thing I really have to say is, thank God that I had Cherylyn as a labor and employment attorney to help navigate the situation. It was tremendously helpful.
Very smart man.
we took this situation very seriously. You know, we reviewed it internally, and then we decided that an external review was appropriate, and had a relationship with the investigator who could review it quickly and efficiently, and that was, as you indicated, the Stewart Law Firm, and people at your you as well as other individuals at your firm. So it's important to understand that, like, kind of as a public entity, Parkland has many stakeholders. We have the public, the employees, executive leadership, officials in Dallas County, such as the judge and the commissioner's court, and again the citizens of Dallas County. And because of that, some of the challenges we deal with are more public than a private entity would have to deal with. And it's very important that we thoroughly investigate. We have accurate facts. We can dispel rumors and ultimately reach the best decision relative to how to handle the situation. So along the way, during this matter, both Carolyn and I were constantly on the phone with senior leadership as the matter developed, and we worked to advise how our different stakeholders, when they get questions, are to answer them in a way that's both accurate and yet respectful of the risk that we're working to mitigate is part of our duties as legal counsel to represent Parkland, our client. And it's very important, I felt, to make sure that we get multiple perspectives, a diverse group of leadership involved in these conversations and situations, and how to resolve them, because they just lend different perspectives, so that we're making sure that we're looking at this from a holistic perspective, from a diverse perspective. And I will say also, it was very helpful to have experts already on contracted with us that could help us and step in and help us navigate through these situations, because it's both internal and internal expertise that helps during these types of situations.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the theme of this presentation, is that when these situations arise, you have to have a foundation in place to deal with racial diversity issues like this. And I think that's a prime example of what you just talked about, that you had experts internally and externally that you guys could rely upon. So turning over to you, Cherylyn, this is your wheelhouse. This is what you do. So talk about your position as having to support Steve and report to senior leadership when these things are swirling around.
Well, I also want to point out that this is one of those cases, or one of those situations where compliance was heavily involved. And part of that is because the department where this happened was a department in the Office of Talent Management. And so we did work very closely amongst all of us. And the first thing we had to do is investigate and figure out what happened. There were a lot of rumors and exaggerated stories, I guess you would call them, and alleged facts that turned out not to be accurate when we investigated. But there was a rumor mill going. There was a lot of discussion amongst the employees in the department. And so we really had to get on it and manage this very quickly before it completely spun out of control. And so we did jump on that. We got Amy in to investigate as quickly as possible. And fortunately, we did already have that relationship. She had done some investigations before for us. And she had, in fact, Amy was recommended to us by one of our WMB law firms. And that's how we originally found her, to have her ready to go whenever we needed her. So we were constantly talking to each other. We were constantly thinking about, okay, who all do we need to interview and make sure we've got our facts correct. And, as most cases probably these days, there are text messages and, all kinds of discussion going on and so forth. So we had to get that, whatever information and evidence, I would call it, is out there. And I would point out this was during a time, the pandemic was well underway by then. A lot of people were working remotely. This group had been brought back, but they were not real happy about being brought back. So there were additional concerns about just being in the office and being, so we looked at the broader, not just this situation as far as the incident that brought this on, but we looked broader, and this was through the Director of Investigations and Compliance, at the whole layout of their office area. I have to give compliance credit. It was really them driving this. They went over, looked at their office space, said, oh my goodness, these people are too close together. Let's get them. They found additional office space. They got it finished. They got a plan to finish it out. Meanwhile, the staff, there had been a COVID exposure, so everybody was sent home again. And while they were out, this renovation of the space was taking place. And then there was a plan to bring them back early February. So it got broader than the racial issue that initially came up. And, as Amy was investigating, these other issues arose, and other concerns, maybe I would say. And so the solutions we came to were broader than just focusing on the racial issue, though we had to focus on that. We needed to focus on that. That was our priority, but we looked at the broader picture as well to try to make the workplace better and more comfortable for people who had concerns that had nothing to do with the racial issue. And then it was at that point, as Amy got to her conclusions, that she brought up the idea of doing some additional work with the staff in the area on implicit bias and appreciation for things that might be offensive to people of certain racial that others might not recognize are offensive. So to get a broader perspective for all the leadership in that department and ultimately all the staff. So that's when Amy recommended Canaris to us.
Yeah, so, and I think that goes a couple of points there. When we went into this, we weren't just thinking singularly on that incident. We were thinking about the whole workplace, right? And how to make it better. So we resolve this, but hopefully assist with issues in the future. And so, Mandy, tossing it over to you, can you just briefly discuss what you are creating for Parkland to kind of resolve the issues that were there or that we had heard about through the investigation?
Yeah, no, sure. So, we are excited to work with Parkland on this. And as I noted earlier, right, there's usually the desire to handle immediate need at hand, but then to have a bigger, longer term strategy, right, to ensure that we are reducing the risk for these type of incidences to happen in the future, which I know is the goal of everyone, and especially the goal of lawyers, right? We want to make sure that we are minimizing any future the likelihood of any future incidences. And so we're working with Parkland. We did our process, which we normally do, right? Which is starting off with the assessments, really being able to measure the work that we're doing, which we know is key and critical, not only to ensure success, but to also build upon that long-term strategy. So we started off with those assessments with this group in particular. Then from there, use those assessments to build upon the trainings that we put in place. And so have a series of trainings and learnings and coachings that we're doing with this team to ensure that we're creating that inclusive and equitable workplace. We know that it's important once any kind of conflict has happened to build that cohesion amongst that team. And so have started that process and I'm working with this group to ensure that we're creating that atmosphere of team building and belonging, which is so critical for any organization. And so in addition to that, I know I might be jumping ahead a little bit. Parkland has hired Dr. Mayfield and working with her as well to ensure that we are measuring and creating that long-term strategy that Steve and Cherylyn talked about that Parkland is rolling out that's so key and critical.
Right, thank you. So I think we've finished up with this first panel, but we want to make sure to provide any of the attendees an opportunity to ask this group questions regarding this their D&I initiatives before we let them go and roll on to our second panel. So while I wait for questions, I'll let you close out, Steve, if you have any closing thoughts about DEI efforts and your lead in that role.
Yeah, I think it was, critical for us, to have already identified a diverse stable of outside law firms, that were highly competent and qualified and able to respond in consultants real time, to the incidents in question and to future incidents that might occur. Because of the sensitive nature of this incident, having qualified, competent WMBE law firms already out of their engagement kind of reduce the pressure because the demand is to act really immediately, and so it enabled us to move swiftly, efficiently, and having those experts such as yourself and members of your team and Mandy and the Canaries team, that have a clear understanding of the sensitive nature of the issues that are involved. So I'm appreciative that we did that legwork and have that process and are engaged already with individuals that at a moment's notice, as Amy, you're so well aware, as I text you like, okay, we got to talk now. But that can help us. So that's really my closing thought.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, and I'll toss it over to Mandy too to talk about it. I mean, I have to say that this is obviously the incident you would never want to happen, but there is such a good intent to resolve that, to find out what happened, but then to be open to me saying, you know what, there may be some other initiatives that you need to look at for the work, and no pushback, and immediately moved into it. And I was able to introduce Mandy, who was quickly able to get on a conference call with compliance and kind of assist with the issues that we saw. So Mandy, I'll let you just speak real quick before we'll turn it over to the next panel.
Yeah, sure. And I saw a question in there. So I want to address the question where someone said, can you expand on your use of data analytics and DEI efforts? So, what we like to talk about our approach is really doing an X-ray. And I think it's really fitting, obviously, given Parkland and the healthcare analogy, that we really have to have a good sense of what's going on. And then from there, write the prescription. And so the prescription usually is going to be some type of interventions, be it trainings, be it an implementation of various other DI initiatives that we may put in place. But we really have to measure and have a sense of what is going on, especially because so much of the inequities or the structural things we see in the workplace are systems-based. So when we're doing assessments, we don't just do assessments with the employees, which is key and critical and one of the things that we really use to drive our DEI strategy, but we're also looking at the processes. Is our talent acquisition process, is the way we do performance reviews, is our pay practices, all of these things. We know that there's research-based evidence that shows the way those systems themselves are structured can lead to more issues around DEI. So we work with organizations on both of those so that we can look at those systems, those practices, those policies, those procedures that the organization is operating under, while also looking at the feedback that we're getting from the employees and be very prescriptive on not only the things that need to change from a practices and policy standpoint, but the different challenges that may exist in different departments or geographic locations, because we know that each of department and location may also be dealing with different issues. But with respect to what we saw, with respect to, some of the things that I think is important and where in-house counsel can really lead, right, in ensuring that we are not just responding to lawsuits, but helping to create change and create those best-in-class processes is what we do when we work with organizations. Is we also create long-term feedback mechanisms so that the employees have a safe way to leave that feedback that doesn't escalate into a lawsuit, right? We want to ensure that we are keeping our pulse on exactly what's going on within the organization before things lead to any kind of complaints within HR or lawsuits or things of that nature. So we create that mechanism where we're keeping a tally on that employee sentiment through our pulse assessments as well.
Got it. Well, going once, going twice, done. First panel is in the books. Thank you so much, Cherylyn and Steve and Mandy, for agreeing to be a part of this. Really appreciate all your feedback. And so if you all could turn your cameras off, and then I will introduce our second panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Coming up with big smiles on their faces, Stacy. There she is. Okay, so let me introduce our second panel, and just in case we run out of time, is that if, as they're speaking, if you come up with a question, attendees, and you want me to pose it to this group, either during or after the presentation, please go ahead and send those in. So let me go ahead and do some introductions. First, we have Chastity Wilson Henry, who is a Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for CECO Environmental Corporation. Chastity is also the founder of the New Roundtable, a nonprofit organization that drives the inclusion and advancement of African American women within the legal profession. Welcome, Ms. Chastity Henry. Next up, Cherylyn Stevenson is the Head of Legal Innovation at The Changes. Cherylyn has held numerous senior and leadership positions, both in corporate law departments and law firms over the last 20 years, planning, monitoring, and executing processes that advance law firm efficiency. Last but not least is Stacy Stevenson, and she is the founder of The Changes. Stacy is also a senior managing director at Charles Schwab & Company and co-founder of Let's Talk, a women's empowerment conference which celebrates the lives and love of the LGBTQ+ women. Okay, so let's talk about this panel. So this panel is really about, it kind of flows off the first one, that when you have to have a diverse network, personally and professionally, if you're ever going to try to move the DEI needle. And so when Chastity, it wasn't just that a pandemic was going on. She said, you know what, I'm just going to start being the general counsel. She got hired, I think it was around February or March or last year. So tell us a little bit about your transition to the GC role during the pandemic. Let's start there.
Start there. Thanks, Amy. And thanks everyone for attending. I'm really excited to be a part of this great discussion. So as Amy said, I accepted the offer to join CECO before becoming aware of the impact of the pandemic. It was March 23rd of last year that I started there. And I really enjoyed my time at Kimberly-Clark, where I was before, leading M&A globally and also leading the D&I committee there. And transitioning to CECO was a tough decision to make for that reason, COVID aside. But CECO was very attractive to me as a company whose mission really boils down to providing our customers with solutions for a cleaner and safer world. CECO also presented an amazing opportunity for me to join the executive leadership team and lead the legal function. And as a company that has lacked a little bit of stability in the legal function over the years, I saw an exciting opportunity to build on the work of my predecessor, who had started building out processes and an internal legal team to support the business. And along with that came challenges, including quickly assessing the needs of the department, triaging a very large to-do list, while also handling the day-to-day, which of course was heavily influenced by COVID and issues surrounding assessing our operations and whether we could continue as an essential business in jurisdictions in the US and across the globe, supporting our HR team in ensuring protection for our employees, et cetera. So on top of that, about 2 weeks in the job, I found myself as the only person in the legal department with plans to add additional internal staff on hold indefinitely. Needless to say, I needed some assistance, but the type of assistance I would engage first would be super important, and I wanted to be very thoughtful about that.
Okay, so you always hear the business case for diversity, and everybody's like, what does that even mean? So Chastity, are there studies out there? Is there such thing as a business case for diversity?
Yes, and I'm sure it was novel back a few years ago when these empirical studies started to pop up, but I'm sure people are more familiar now. One study in particular that provides some empirical evidence that diverse teams do perform better, and companies with greater diversity perform better across a variety of important financial metrics is the 2015 Why Diversity Matters study by McKinsey & Co. It provides a lot of great insight. What strikes me from the studies that there is proof that one of the reasons diverse teams perform better is that diversity fosters innovation and creativity through a greater variety of problem-solving approaches, perspectives, and ideas. And there's academic research actually showing that diverse groups of people outperform even experts in a certain field. And the why really for me boils down to that it combats groupthink. A diversity of informed views enables objections around the tables. People have different backgrounds, they have different experiences. And so rather than coming from a similar place with similar views, you are more likely to have people who disagree and see it a different way. And research specifically indicates that the presence of women and minority members on a leadership team enhances problem solving in the same way, because they do help to round out the perspectives of the group. And so ethnic and gender diversity, offer companies the opportunity for more problem solving tools in their tool belt, broader thinking, and better solutions. And I don't know a company or a business who would not like to explore that. And to me, that's a really good business case for diverse teams.
Yeah, and I think, as I keep telling my 16-year-old, you can disagree without being disagreeable. Just because we disagree, it doesn't have to be ugly. It actually can help foster and make things better. Stacy, so they snuck one on us because it first was D&I. And then I don't even know when it changed. And now it's DEI. Why? Why was the change necessary?
Yeah, I think I told you the story, Amy, of a company that I worked for where the organization was called D&I for quite a while. And then all of a sudden we have a notification that it was DEI, and no one really knew what does that E mean. But when we think about the E is really important. It's part of a continuing evolution of D&I, which it has to continue to evolve. And there's this growing focus on equity. And the reason for that is that you cannot have equality without equity. That makes sense? You cannot have full equality without equity, right? So, and to define that, equality is everyone gets the same. Equity is everyone gets what they need and deserve. Those are the differences. So that's why you need equity. And there's a growing number of people that see that equity sort of as a gap builder of how you get from diversity to inclusion. You need that E because you need equity. And an example of that is, I worked for a big financial firm, and we had people who had to pass a broker test in order to become a registered broker. And what we found is that the white males were passing this test at a higher rate than the females and the people of color. Well, why? Everyone had access to training. They got the same training. They have the same access to everything. So that implies equality. What we found is that the women and the people of color had additional burdens. They had imposter syndrome. They had home life challenges. They needed more flexibility in terms of their schedule. So these things were preventing them from passing that test at the same rate that their white counterparts were, their white male counterparts. So we had to put systems in place in order to make that a more equitable solution for them, to solve for that. And so we put a mentoring program into place. So we do have to think about equity. The E is very much so important. And we need to think about equitable access, equitable balances of power, and also put equitable systems in place.
Got it. Cherylyn, anything to add on the business case for diversity, or why we switched from D&I to DEI?
Absolutely, because there's also another layer to it. So equity is also about how the company advances diversity and equality within its value chain, which that includes suppliers and vendors, which is who you hire for services, customers, and the community at large. So building a diverse supply chain has a positive impact on the growth of diverse or underrepresented business communities economically. And that could ensure a more competitive supply chain overall. So companies can also use your philanthropic dollars. So these are who you sponsor, and you can use that money strategically to address racism and social injustice. So there's also that other layer to equity and equality than just stopping at the employee level.
So it's more of infiltrating your business and personal life is what I hear you saying.
Absolutely.
It just can't be just right. It's got to be bigger than that.
Yeah, it's not mutually exclusive, right? So
Yeah.
you can be part of it, and you can be part of the equity in so many different lanes within. It's not just as simple, cut and dry D&I and DEI.
Okay, so I don't think I'm telling my age, but there was a show, it was called Scandal, and Olivia Pope was in it. And there was this scene where they're in a hangar and she's about to jump on this private jet, and her dad comes up to her and he says, the quote that I know I've heard is that we have to be twice as good to get half as much. And I know when I watched that scene live, I was like, he wasn't supposed to tell nobody, like that was said out loud to the world. Did that resonate with you, Stacey, when you saw that scene or heard about it? Because I mean, it was all over the news the next day as well.
Unfortunately, it resonates very deeply. It resonates in a very, very deep place. And it's an uncomfortable truth that I believe that people of color, we have accepted. I don't think everybody was aware of it. Maybe that's why it made the news and why it was so shocking to people. But this is our truth. And it's one of those pills that's really hard to swallow, but it is a truth of our existence. And this is how we operate. This is how we navigate the world. This is what we tell our kids in the privacy of our homes before we go send them off to, navigate this unequal world. And, when I was in corporate America, I had this mantra that I had to be so good that they couldn't ignore me. And I knew that I had to do that. I had to just work harder and be seen more. And I remember there was a CEO I worked for, and he said, stay in front of me. I need you to stay in front of me. And I'm like, I'm working my butt off, but now I need to stay in front of you. So he wouldn't forget about me. That's really essentially what he was insinuating. Stay in front of me so I won't forget about you. So when promotions come about and those sorts of things, I can think about Stacey. But it was just an added burden to this performance that we already have to do. Right? It's a constant performance. It's a constant burden, but it is the truth. And so it absolutely did resonate with me, Amy. And I think that we're going to have to continue, obviously, to operate in that way until it's a so everybody sort of accepts it and understands, why are we being judged so harshly? And why are we being put in what I call the black box?
I don't want to be in the black box. I don't
You don't want to
know
be in the
if
black box.
I
The
don't
black
wanna
box
be-
is very limiting.
I don't want to be in there.
Box is sort of what we're put in, and that's how we're judged. And that's a very limiting experience for us.
Cherylyn, anything to add?
Yeah, so I grew up in a household like so many other Black people. So when I saw that on Scandal, I was a little late to the Scandal game. I probably saw it 3 years after, but then I binge watched all of the seasons and then I saw it all and it was great. But when I heard that quote, it was soul crushing for me in some ways because it's the truth. And like we like to think and believe that, oh, this is something said in our house and nobody else knows about it, but it's really not a secret. It is something that everyone, every Black household has said. I have said it to my 6-year-old twins, and it's our way of living. So growing up for me with my parents, I couldn't clean a toilet or take the trash out in a way that wasn't excellent because they quickly would remind me that to be successful and to be seen by others, I would have to be extraordinary. So just the way that I would clean, the way that I would carry myself, we couldn't just go out and there were no yoga pants back then, but the equivalent of it for then, I had to have a matching outfit. I had to present myself in a way at all times. While our neighbors would play outside, it was common for me to be doing a book report inside. My parents would assign me things to read and do a book report. It was Encyclopedia Britannica at that time, if anyone knows about that. Anytime we were in the car, just on a car ride, my parents were constantly quizzing my brother and me on spelling words and math. And I knew how to take care of a household as early as elementary school. I had to check the mail, balance the checkbooks. I had to take typing class. I was typing probably 80 words per minute by the time I was in 4th grade. And those are all the things that our parents there's a little bit of innocence that in a sense gets taken away because we have that burden to carry and because they have experienced how different things can be for them. They raised us in a way that was, we don't want you to struggle the way we do and the way that we did. And so we want to give you a leg up just so you can have half as much as others. And so that's really, you know, the contribution that my parents made, and that stuck with me, and it still goes down to my kids.
So Chastity, when you were AGC or not the GC, did you feel that burden as well when you were trying to talk about diversifying the hiring of outside counsel or hiring out diverse vendors?
Yeah, I'll first just echo, you know, the comments that were already made. You know, I've also heard the mantra, you have to work, you know, twice as good to get half as much. And my parents definitely instilled in me that, you know, more a message around working hard, being excellent. You know, there was not an option not to do my very best and to show up and be prepared. And so, yeah, I always understood that in my professional career, that while everyone makes mistakes, I may not be so easily forgiven for those mistakes. And those would not only potentially reflect upon me, but other people like me, right? When you don't have a critical mass and you have one Black woman attorney, you know, perhaps if she messes up, she makes a mistake, perhaps that reflects on the next time you're in the recruiting process. It's not right, but that's the reality. And so it's caused me, in general, I'm very particular about the way I show up and prepare for everything from meetings to deal negotiations, et cetera. And it's also caused me to be particular when engaging outside counsel, consultants, or anyone representing me or the department or the company. But I have the same standards for everyone. It would be unfair for me to hold people of color or women to a higher standard in an attempt to combat bias that just adds to, you know, the institutional structural issues we already have. I just hold everyone to the same very high standard, and it tends to work well. So when I engage a woman or a person of color or a person from an underrepresented group, I'm confident that they meet those standards because when I make the recommendation, I've already done the diligence. I'm willing and able to stand by my decision. And so to answer your question, I've never been shy about recommending women, people of color, people from underrepresented groups before I was the GC, before I had decision-making power. And I had to get past how it looked. I had to get past the fact that, someone may notice that I am always recommending people who may not look like the people who are typically recommended for these roles, for these board positions, for jobs, for representation. But it's more important to me to strive for equity and to be that voice when I may be the only person in the room making that recommendation than it is to worry about any stereotypes that, I may be walking into.
Yeah, and I think that goes to a concern that you have versus other people who don't go through the mental gymnastics of who I'm about to recommend for this matter.
Right.
But it's what we have to go through. Like I went through it even though anybody knows Mandy Price, top of the game. But even with her, it was like there was an anxiety that I was going to recommend canaries in Mandy, even though I knew she would do an exceptional job. So tell us about you making the case for bringing in the changes then during a pandemic, and you just got the GC job.
Sure. Well, early on in the role, there were a couple of things that I knew. One is that we needed to implement processes in a lot of areas. Two, that I needed some help with analyzing and prioritizing our needs, and then developing appropriate processes in order of priority. I didn't want to and could not boil the ocean, but definitely some work needed to be done and quickly. And as you may be able to tell from my responses, process and process improvement are really important to me, foundational to me. And I've known Cherylyn for years. We go way back. We grew up going to the same church. So I've known her personally for a very long time. But I also got to know her professionally over the past decade. And we've had an ongoing conversation about our views on legal operations, legal department management. When she was a paralegal and I was a legal counsel, we were having those conversations. When she was going to get her MBA and doing legal ops, and I was an AGC, we were still having those conversations and getting to know each other. And I knew we were on the same page. And so as I started to explore GC roles, and once I thought I was pretty close to the offer stage with CECO, Cherylyn and I sat down for lunch, and I shared my excitement and vision for the role and the legal function, along with some of the challenges I anticipated. And we started exchanging ideas for how those challenges could be addressed and the opportunities. And she had already told me about the changes when they started their company and shared Stacy's background as well. So it was really natural for me to call on them very early on in my tenure at CECO because I had already had the relationship. I knew our shared vision. I knew the skills that they were bringing to the table to assist in a time where I really needed help and didn't want to start from scratch with someone I didn't know. Going back to, you've got to be very confident in who you have show up for you. And so that would not have been possible without years of being intentional on both our parts about building a relationship, even when I wasn't hiring her, she wasn't helping me yet. We were just exchanging ideas and staying in touch.
Okay, so Cherylyn, briefly tell us what is the changes, and then after you get done, Stacy, if you could tell us about why the changes is different than other consulting companies. So go ahead, Cherylyn.
Yeah, we're a minority and women-owned legal and technology consulting firm here in Dallas. We work with clients outside of Dallas too. We have strong diversity and equality values. We really pride ourselves on being able to save our clients money and time. And we do that by listening and by understanding their current business model. We create and help them reach their goals. And then we also provide professional advice and solutions focused on increasing productivity and lowering their out-of-pocket costs. So I'll let Stacy kind of talk more into how we differentiate between other consultants.
Yeah, so, let's start with the name, which is different, right? And we were really intentional about this name. And so when we say changes, we are changes through and through in terms of the way that we operate, the way that we live our lives, the way that we want to touch the world and be in this world. We truly believe in change and intentional change. And so we bring that thinking, we bring that heart to our clients. I think another differentiator is me bringing the business lens and Cherylyn bringing the legal lens. And with my experience in corporate America for 20 something plus years or so, Cherylyn's legal experience and sort of almost every aspect that you could be in legal is really a powerful combination. And we talked about this for years, where we would say, why are legal departments or legal organizations, law firms not understanding or implementing sound business practices? Why is there a gap there? And so what differentiates us is that we've learned how to bring those two worlds together for our clients. But typically speaking, Amy, you'll call a consultant with a problem and you'll tell them your problem and they'll come listen to you, someone like you as the founding, partner, and they'll listen to you and they'll go, okay, great, here's your recommendations and here's how you fix it. And usually they're in and out. As Chastity knows and Amy, we don't do that. We want to get to know your environment. So we are listening to you, but we're going to talk to your staff too. And we're going to talk to your vendors. And then we're going to talk to ex-employees. We talk to everybody. We call that environmental scan. And the reason we do that is that the problem statement that you come to us with may not be the one that we need to solve, or there may be multiple legs to that problem. And we want to be able to give you a holistic view of what's going on within your organization. And so we don't want this sort of one and done thing. So we will do an environmental scan. We talk to everyone. We start getting recommendations and we sit down with you and we tell you where your gaps are. We tell you what the recommendations are. We even tell you that you believe your vision is this, but your staff says it's this. And here's a gap. And how do we close that gap? So it truly is this holistic approach to helping you solve your issues, understanding what the multiple problems are. And then not only that, now let's help you implement it. So we're not just going to hand you over the recommendations and it's very transactional and we're done. We are now within your environment. We're going to help you implement. And we also are able to take the burden off of you because we know your environment so well. We can run vendor relationships with your vendor strategies, vendor management. We can do interviews on your behalf and talk to interviewees without you ever even being in the process. We'll send you a nice video and you'll just watch it and go, yeah, I want to pick that person. So it's really about partnering with you, getting to know you and not being transactional, but being very relational with our relationship with our clients.
So Chastity, new GC, and you guys know all that corporate consultants speak. What did they do? What did they do for you?
Yeah, good question. A lot, and there's a lot to talk about here, but I'll stick to the highlights. I think that first, like I said, we had already started this conversation. And so a couple of weeks in, I probably texted Cherylyn, and this is not a direct quote, but probably close, and said, hey, you remember those things we talked about? It's time. In other words, help. And they jumped right in and partnered with me. They asked questions to flesh out what CECO does. Who are our internal and external stakeholders? What role does legal currently play vis-a-vis all of those constituents? And how do we prioritize that work that needs to be done? That was phase one. Phase two, we identified those priorities, mapped out project plans for accomplishing those. And we don't have time to get into many of the details, but for instance, one major priority that was raised was the contracting process. It didn't take me a long time or a complicated analysis to figure out that since we're a B2B company and enter into contracts with our customers to secure business, get orders, money, getting a handle on and enhancing our contracting process from both a resourcing and substantive perspective, while not causing disruption to the business was of utmost importance. And that would first involve understanding our contracting landscape enterprise-wide. And we did not have much data around our contracts. From the basic, they're shaking their heads, they're nodding, from the basic data points around how many contracts, what types, what regions of the world, so volume based, to how long does a typical contract review take? How many turns does it take? What are the key risk areas? So the more substantive data points with contracts. And so to start, Stacy and Cherylyn conducted 30 to 40 interviews with internal stakeholders involved in our contracting process over a 2 to 3 week period very early in my tenure. So I would have loved to conduct those interviews myself, but with onboarding, with COVID, with board meetings, et cetera, I simply could not do it in the time and with the thoroughness that I wanted or needed to do it. So, and this ultimately, this work, and they'll get into more detail, I'm sure, led to an RFP for a contract lifecycle management provider, and helping me not only with the RFP, but to build the business case for the solution itself. Because I had to not only propose it, make the case, and then get budget to pay for it. And then for external or internal contract review support. So again, this is just one of the projects they were involved in immediately, but I think you can see how they came in, learn about the company, about my vision for the department, and immediately began to build value in helping me to address some of our most pressing needs early on.
Cherylyn, what were some of the challenges that you and Stacy faced with taking on this huge project?
Yeah, I mean, so you had a new Black GC that hired 2 Black consultants right away as she was going in the door, and so were we with her. So there just became a very concerted effort to make sure that we're just proving our value continuously. We found ourselves within the interviews. Sometimes it would feel like we were almost being interviewed. So they would kind of push back and ask us questions. And that's typical, too. But at the same time, there was also this need of always going in. There was never an interview that I went into that I didn't take a good 15-minute meditation room type of situation and just sit there first, get my mind right, go in there, just go fresh and ready to just listen and to learn. I think that's really the thing. And once we were able to establish that we were really trying to partner with them and gaining their trust, making sure that we obviously come off as credible, as an extension of Chastity's team as well, we were able to establish those relationships. And you would find that though, even after the interviews, there would be people who came back and say, we're thinking about doing this in our department. Would you be able to help with that? So it really just came down to just making sure that we worked a little bit harder than normal to just make sure that there's an understanding that we're here to partner with you, that we're here to, we're not here to just change everything that we're here to make it better.
So Chastity, can you talk a little bit about, so you came in, your previous GC, highly respected, and actually was a very huge help to you, but you're coming in changing things. You're like the new sheriff in town. So can you talk a little bit about the skills the soft skills, frankly, you had to have to navigate that situation? And then what you were looking for in the changes when they were coming in to initiate the change that you thought needed to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was looking for people who could be my proxies within the business, which involves a lot of trust. Obviously, first because I was, as we've talked about, brand new and still in the process of getting to know people myself and introducing myself to them, which presents more challenges, obviously, in a remote environment. And then second, because people did not know me well or at all at this point. So it was imperative that the folks that I engaged to liaise with these stakeholders throughout the organization shared my values and vision for the department and for the legal function. And not only that, but as you said, soft skills were important. To your point, I did not want to send a signal that I was aiming to make change simply for the sake of making change. There were a lot of things going well. There were a lot of processes put in place already in the department. And so I wanted to be seen as a partner, someone who listens and wants to be responsive to business realities. And deploying the changes to have direct conversations within the business was my way of conducting a listening tour before implementing a single policy or process. And of course, there was a very carefully planned kickoff where I introduced Cherylyn and Stacy to the team and provided context for their roles and the meetings we'd be scheduling with stakeholders and my confidence in them and what I saw them doing. And I could speak, all day about the work we did together, but I'll stop there to let them share their perspectives. But that's what I was looking for. As much technical skills as soft skills were important for this role.
Stacy, can you take that up? What were the soft skills that you needed to use to make sure these people didn't close down on you and provide the information that you needed?
Yeah, well, having these conversations with them was a bit difficult because, again, as Chastity said, they didn't know Chastity, they didn't know us. So one of the processes that we employed was that we needed to listen to their pain points and listen to their problems. So it wasn't that, hey, here's a new GC, new sheriff in town, we're coming and we're changing everything regardless of what you have to say. What we said is that, what are your pain points? And Chastity wanted to hear this too. So what are some of the constraints and the barriers that you are having with the legal department right now? What can we do to make your life easier, your job easier? How can we better understand your job and your role? We asked them those questions and it really put their defense down and they started to trust us. They started to understand that we weren't there just to make some sweeping changes, but they were going to be a part of the change. And that's key to change management. People are so key to change management. So it was really about listening, understanding their pain points, and then taking those pain points seriously. Chastity mentioned that we had a kickoff meeting, and we also had a area where we looked at all the recommendations and we looked at all the quotes that everyone gave us, and we shared those quotes with Chastity so she could actually see those. And then we said, here's what we're going to do about them. So I think the answer is, Amy, that they felt heard, and we talked to them about their specific points, because a lot of times people fear change because they think it's going to make it harder for them or that you're not listening to them. And it was about, how do we make your job easier?
Yeah, I'm hearing themes of how can the legal department serve you, like a servant leadership type messaging versus we're the legal department, take it or leave it.
Exactly.
So transitioning a bit, Stacy, why is your diversity an asset?
So, I think my background as an underrepresented person has shaped my worldview in a different way. And I often tell people, because I grew up underrepresented and somewhat in this chaotic mode, that it's sort of manifested into this need to create change and intentional change and fix issues everywhere I go. Eliminate chaos is what I say everywhere I go. So I think that's an asset to our clients. The other thing is the diverse background that I bring. I've worked in finance, in technology, defense. Chastity knew I had a supply chain background. And I look at these things from all of those lenses. So if you're giving us your problem, I'm not looking at it through one lens, I'm looking at it through those multiple lenses. And no matter if you're a law firm or you're a tech company, finance, tech, all those things matter. So I look at the problems through a very diverse lens and look at it through a business lens as well. And that's an asset, right? It's very diverse. These things are very complex. And I'm able to help our law firm clients by looking at it in a very diverse way and using those different backgrounds and industries that I've worked in.
Got it. So we're coming up on the hour. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that we have on the chat. So if you guys could I'm going to toss one to Chastity real quick, but if you guys could look at those and then I'll pose them so that the attendees can hear your answers. Chastity, I am always one of these people that say DEI includes everyone, and that includes white men. Like, I have so many white brothers out there that'll come to me and say, I just don't think I can be a part of the conversation, right? So if there is, and maybe there's not, but let's just hypothetically say there's a white man or a white woman that's listening and they look to the right and the left of their business and there's no one diverse there. They look to the right and the left in their life, there's no one diverse there. What suggestions do you have for them to create a more diverse environment around them?
That's a good question. I'll first say that relationships have always been of utmost importance when engaging with outside counsel, with consultants, etc. Now, the reason why we put formal processes and policies in place when we're trying to ensure a diverse slate of vendors is because many people simply do not have diverse networks, right? And to me, that's the root cause of many of our struggles around engaging diverse outside counsel, diverse consultants. I support any means or most means of addressing that issue heads on. So sometimes that means that we as leaders and as decision makers especially need to do the hard work of transforming our networks. Reach out, get to know people who you may not just run into at the office or in the conferences you frequent or at the country club. That takes work, and that takes a willingness to embrace discomfort. That's the root cause.
In a vulnerability.
And vulnerability.
The ability to be vulnerable.
That's right. But I think it's worth it. I think, with whether you go out and seek and join NAMWOLF to get to know women and minority-owned law firms, or the new roundtable when you're looking for women of color outside counsel or in-house counsel, or engage the changes intentionally because they can do the work and they're going to bring a different perspective than your typical network. I think it's a great idea to reach out to people and simply admit you want to expand your network. You want to have a more diverse array of friends, of colleagues, of consultants. I'm not offended at all when people approach me with that type of authenticity and transparency. I think it's a good thing, and I think it gets to the root of the problem.
Yeah, so I want to be clear to all our attendees. Chastity, Henry, are you saying it is okay for someone who does not have a diverse background to call you up and have that conversation? Is that okay? Because people, again, like we talk about it, it's hard to talk about race. It's hard to talk about these issues. Is it okay to talk to you about it?
It's okay. Who I applaud for this actually is a lot of times we're seeing recruiters do it a lot. And they'll reach out and say, more or less, we want a diverse slate of candidates here. We think people who may be different than the people we know. Could you give us an introduction? I am always happy to take that phone call and to make those connections. And I think, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I think a lot of people would be more happy with that approach and that sort of genuineness and authenticity around getting to the root of the problem than skirting around the issue.
Got it. Okay, so let's go to some questions. So we got Allison here. Could the panelists speak to incremental practical steps that legal departments can take to address DEI within their organizations and in making decisions for hiring consultants and outside counsel? I'm gonna give that to you, Chastity.
Yeah, one is, I think what I mentioned is building relationships with a diverse array of people in general. And that may include going out of your comfort zone. And so I kind of mentioned a couple organizations, but there are all sorts of organizations too. As the department gets bigger and depending on whether leadership is bought in or everyone down the line is bought in, you may have to institute formal policies. Like the GC from Parkland, Steve was talking about, to ensure that your hiring practices do reflect your goals around diversity. But the most important thing I think is, and I don't mean for this to sound dismissive or make it sound easier than it should, but it's courage. Have the courage to bring in that vendor from a small company or a startup or a woman-owned business, even if no one's ever heard of them. Do your diligence, be confident they're going to show up and represent you the right way, and stand by that, because if you don't do it as a leader, as a decision maker, other people will be hesitant to do it. So especially if you're the leader of the department, have the courage to stand by your convictions and engage with people that maybe people in the C-suite with you wouldn't normally expect you to hire, but you hire them, they do an outstanding job, and now you've broken down a barrier.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so Laura's got a question. Do you have any, and this is for anyone that wants to take this one, do you have any suggestions for learning more about the distinction between equity and equality addressed earlier?
I'll take that one. Laura, there are a myriad of resources out in the web. But what I can do, and Amy, I don't know how we facilitate this, but I have a great presentation from a consultant who did it for a nonprofit learning lab, where he has these important distinctions between equity and equality. And he also has a couple of examples and problems actually that'll, you read it and then you just decide between yourself what's equity and what's equality. So it kind of gets you assimilated to it. I'd be happy to share that if there's a way to facilitate that to the audience.
Yeah, you can send it. You can send it to me and I'll get it to Susan, who can
Okay.
get it to everybody. So that's good.
Perfect.
I
I think it's a
have
good start.
Okay, I have a question from Michelle. Are there any groups or organizations that you would recommend to diversify our social legal vendor networks? That's a good one.
The vendor networks, man. I mean, it sounds like we need to build one. I certainly don't know about them, but I did want to touch on, and I mean, and Chastity and Mandy may know, and Stacy can chime in, but I did want to also piggyback off of some things that were talked about earlier, where we're talking about bringing in these lesser known consultants and vendors and all of that and giving them a chance. And that seems to be a theme when I'm looking at the chats of how do you make the business case for it. For us, and you know, we really pride ourselves on showing up. We show up and we're professional and that's who we are. But the one thing that I will say that also is a differentiator, for example, with this CECO engagement with Chastity, the enormous amount of pressure and weight that you take on as a minority-owned business, you carry this in your spirit as if this was your project. So with Chastity being the first Black GC at her company, we're likely the first Black consultants the company has been exposed to. We take that information very seriously and the impact that it could have for an entire lineage of people. So if we don't show up at the top of our game every single time, then we're risking people not taking a chance on us. So that's why you should take a chance on people who think like that, because we all kind of have that same belief of every day that we show up, we're interviewing for a job of someone who looks like us, and the idea that they're going to be able to get hired in the future. So I would just encourage everyone to fight a little bit harder. I know that there's things in the works. I've talked to many people in this space who have those questions about where are these vendors that are minority owned? Where are these consultants? Where are these firms? They're out there, but being able to bring them into a place that you're able to access them, that's kind of the missing piece. And you know, that's kind of what we're here talking about today, right, with the equity. So instead of always hiring the exact same company, let's be more intentional. And you guys, and you know, we like to pride ourselves on being a little bit of the plug and knowing a little bit about a lot within the industry. So we're also happy to send you, you know, to other people who are in our networks that also do these things.
Yeah, so Chastity, you probably want to talk about the new roundtable, or?
Oh yeah, yes, I do. Just to, you know, the New Roundtable is an organization that we started. Amy is actually our treasurer and on the board this year, but we started it years ago. I won't, you know, go into details, but we started 5 or 6 years ago. It really is a network of Black women lawyers in Dallas, half inside counsel, half outside counsel. And we've been very intentional about getting opportunities to the group, from board memberships to jobs, to, you know, speaking engagements. Thank you, Amy, et cetera. And yeah, that has been really impactful and giving back to the community. And so one plug is that, you know, if you're out there recruiting for talented women of color in the legal profession, New Roundtable is one example of a group where we have a weekly newsletter and we put job postings in it. And if a recruiter comes to me and says, we want a diverse slate of candidates, I put that listing in the New Roundtable newsletters, and you know, more of us than I can count have gotten opportunities based on that. So that's a plug for our group.
Yeah,
And
no,
just to close the gap real quick, just because, I want to emphasize the results that the changes have gotten for us. We conducted a successful RFP. We have implemented contract lifecycle management technology. We're in the design phase that Stacy's helping with right now. We have a new legal website that is about to launch. We have a new legal newsletter that's about to launch, thanks to Cherylyn, because communication was one of the things we want to focus on. I've hired 4 people on my team. So we made the case for both external and internal resources, et cetera. And so I want to say that this is not just about talk and about, oh, it would be nice to bring in some people. This is about results. And I knew it when I hired them, and they've done nothing but come through for me.
got it. Got it. Well, we are out of time. Angela, I'm going to get you that information about the new roundtable so that you will have that. And I'll get that to Susan. I'll get the resources that we talked about today to Susan, and she can share it. So Susan, I want to thank the ACC for, allowing Stewart Law Group to sponsor this. I love working with Mark Melton. I want to thank all our panelists here today for showing up and showing out. So thank you so much for that. So Susan, I'm going to turn it back over to you.